I was the neglected stepson, and I got pregnant with the eldest son's child. Logic told me I should terminate it, but the moment I stood in that hospital, I regretted it. So that night, I changed all my contact information and bought a plane ticket to City A. 6 years later, we met again. Hugo found me. He held onto my arm, yet looked at me with pleading eyes and said, "It doesn't matter who the father is. I can be his stepdad." 1. I never expected to run into Hugo in the emergency room. Grace was lying quietly in my arms, crying softly. I sat in a chair outside the exam room, gently comforting her with hushed words. She was already 5 years old, and not exactly light. After holding her for over half an hour, my entire arm felt numb. Soon, her name was called. The doctor on duty was young, wearing a surgical mask while looking up appointment records on the computer. When we walked in, he asked, "Grace?" He looked up, and I saw a face I knew all too well. He'd completely lost the softness of his youth. His eyes now carried a sharp, cold intensity. Hugo. It was Hugo. For the first time, I truly realized, fate enjoys messing with me. The moment I saw him, I instinctively wanted to hide. But all I could do was tighten my grip on Grace and turn my face away as much as possible. I didn't need a mirror to imagine how awful I must have looked: messy hair, a hastily thrown-on outfit, and a greasy stain from lunch that Grace had accidentally left on my shirt. "Yes," I answered, lowering my voice. Even though I did my best to shrink into the background, I still couldn't escape Hugo's gaze. After 2 or 3 seconds of heavy silence, a familiar voice called out softly, "Gu." A casual Chinese way to say, "brother." There was no point hiding anymore. I looked up and met his eyes, dark, unreadable, impossible to tell what he was thinking. There was no joy in this long-awaited reunion. No resentment for my silent departure either. Only a flicker in his eyes when he looked down at Grace in my arms. "She's running a fever." He pulled out a thermometer. "Let's check her temperature. Anywhere she's hurting?" Hugo didn't ask me anything. He didn't ask why I disappeared 6 years ago without a word. He just followed protocol, checking on Grace's condition and then instructing me to take her for further tests. The results came quickly. They suspected acute encephalitis triggered by high fever. She needed a spinal tap. Grace was well behaved, gripping my hand tightly the whole time because she was nervous. The diagnosis came back fast. By the time she was getting 4 fluids, Grace had already fallen asleep. I finally let out a long breath, but as soon as the dust settled, a wave of fear rushed in and stung my nose. Hugo walked into the room in a white coat, glancing over the chart. "Her condition is stabilizing. We'll monitor her overnight, but no need to worry. After 2 weeks of 4 treatment, she should be able to go home." "Thank you," I whispered, wiping away tears with the back of my hand. I didn't want to show any weakness in front of Hugo. "Did you get married?" he asked, still standing there with no intention of leaving. I didn't feel like I owed him any explanation. "What's it got to do with you? You got married and didn't even send me an invitation?" He pressed a hand on my shoulder and leaned in. His eyes curved like he was smiling, but there wasn't the slightest hint of joy. "I'm not your Jeet anymore." I forced myself to stay cold. But I couldn't stop my body from reacting to the scent of his pheromones. It trembled slightly, out of my control. "Where's the kid's other father?" Hugo sneered. "Bruno? You picked that kind of irresponsible guy. It's been hours since check-in and he still hasn't shown up. What is he, the president of some country?" He was mocking himself. "I told you, it has nothing to do with you." "Says who?" Hugo squatted down and forced me to face him. "I'm your little brother. As long as your mom and my dad haven't divorced, you're still listed as my brother on the household registry. Bruno, don't even think about denying it." "Who is that man?" His palm clamped around my wrist, slowly tightening like a snake. "If life out there was so awful, why didn't you come home?" I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "That's your home, not mine." Hugo shook his head like a stubborn child refusing to accept the truth. There's no such thing as a home of mine unless you're in it. I softened my tone, trying to reason with him. Hugo, I have my own home now. I have a child of my own. I don't need that old home anymore, do you understand? Then what about me? You don't want me either? His eyes turned red almost instantly. The tears gathering there looked like they were ready to fall. I've always had a weakness for Hugo when he cried. And he knew it, he used it like a weapon. I let out a sigh. Hugo, don't do this. It's okay if you don't need me. I've been looking for you for so long. Just, promise me you won't disappear again without a word. Please. His voice was almost a plea. 2. Grace's fever had dropped significantly by the next day. She still had a slight temperature, but her energy had improved. Still, she looked a bit down, lying in bed with little to do since the 4 treatment kept her stuck there for hours. I brought her some picture books, but she wasn't really in the mood to read. She just sat there listlessly. Hugo came in for rounds and pulled a Lego set from behind his back. Grace lit up immediately, but instead of taking it right away, she looked at me for permission. Of course, I couldn't bring myself to say no, so I gave her a silent nod. Hugo glanced at me and explained. She's stuck here getting IVs all day, it must be boring. I thought this might help kill some time. Not sure what kids are into these days. Do you like this toy? Hugo asked gently, teasing her a little. Grace nodded, her little pigtails bouncing. I love it. Hugo added. If anything hurts, you have to tell someone, okay? Don't keep it in just to avoid worrying your dad. Only if you get fully better will he stop worrying. Grace nodded again. Watching them interact so naturally, I suddenly thought, Hugo would probably make a great father. Grace took the Lego box in her hands and said sweetly, "Thank you, Uncle." No need to thank me. I'm your dad's younger brother, so that makes you my niece. If anything doesn't feel right, be sure to tell me, okay? Hugo bent down to meet her eyes. Grace bashfully held the Lego set up to her face, a little shy, but smiling from ear to ear. I nudged Hugo's waist with my elbow and muttered. What are you calling yourself now? She's your kid, and you're my brother. Did I get it wrong? Hugo stood up straight. Of course he got it wrong, because she's his child, too. That night, when his first heat hit, it came on so strong I still remember the burning breath against the side of my neck. Hugo had no idea how to mark someone properly, fumbling and mumbling about how uncomfortable he felt. His uncontrolled ocean-scented pheromones were so overwhelming they practically suffocated me. But when it came to that part in bed, he needed no guidance at all. The marks he left on my waist took an entire month to fully fade. Now, as Hugo watched Grace happily playing on her own, his attention slowly shifted back to me. Go. I could tell he wanted to speak privately, so I followed him out of the room. The other parent still hasn't shown up, he asked. Tired of stacking lies on top of lies, I just said. We're divorced. Hugo frowned immediately. You're raising Grace by yourself. Grace is well behaved. Go, I can help you. Hugo grabbed my arm. Why won't you trust me even a little? Hugo, I'm done with that family. I pried his fingers off me, one by one. Don't think any of this is your fault. Later that afternoon, Grace was in great spirits. Because she couldn't move much with the 4 still in, it took her a long time just to assemble half the Lego model. Once the needle was removed, I took her for a short walk on the hospital lawn. She leaned over a bench, meowing at a cat. I didn't expect to run into Curtis on the way back to the room. Then again, maybe I should have expected it the moment I saw Hugo again. Curtis was leaning lazily against the exam room doorway, asking a nurse where Hugo was. He was my half-brother, my mom's golden child. He once made a bet with his friends and tricked me into going to a bar. I broke my arm just trying to escape. When my mother found out, her only concern was whether Curtis would get into trouble because of it. I had no interest in running into him, so I quickly held Grace's shoulder and guided her back into the room. But of course, I didn't get away that easily. Bruno? It really is you. I thought my eyes were playing tricks. Curtis raised an eyebrow. I blocked the doorway. It's been a while. I'm shocked you even remember I'm your brother. Curtis's gaze shifted to Grace, who was still playing with her Lego on the hospital bed. That your bastard kid from outside? Watch your mouth. I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him against the wall. Grace was right there. I didn't want to fight. But I couldn't let him insult her. Looks like you've had a pretty rough few years, Curtis sneered, mocking me. Dragging some brat around, no wonder you turned out an Omega. Oh? And I suppose a mediocre alpha like you only feels better about himself by insulting Omegas? Or did you forget you were born to one? I let out a cold laugh. Sure enough, Curtis's face twisted with anger. What are you even doing here? Hugo's voice rang out from behind me. I let go of Curtis's collar. Hugo. Curtis's expression flipped instantly, turning to flattery. But Hugo's face was cold, even a little impatient. I thought I told you not to show up at the hospital. Curtis's smile faltered. Didn't Mom and Dad ask me to see if you were coming home for dinner this weekend? Hugo stepped between us. I have surgery this weekend. I couldn't see Curtis anymore, but his greasy voice was still as annoying as ever. Hugo, you've been in City A for months and haven't gone home once. Mom and Dad miss you. Hugo glanced toward the half-open door to the hospital room. There's a patient. Say what you want and go. I closed the door behind me and returned to Grace's side. A moment later, Hugo came in. Did you take Grace's temperature today? What was it? 37.8. About 100 degrees Fahrenheit. He nodded. Still a little high. Any other discomfort? Grace shook her head. Nope. After recording her symptoms, Hugo looked back at me, concern in his eyes. Go, you don't look so well. Only then did I realize, I was nearing my heat cycle. But with everything going on with Grace, I'd forgotten to prepare any suppressants. Hugo said he had some spares in his office. I told Grace not to wander off and followed him there. While he searched for the meds, he asked, Does your arm still ache when it rains? It actually didn't anymore, and I was surprised he brought it up. Maybe Curtis had reminded him of it. Back then, Hugo broke Curtis's leg over that incident and got locked up for a week. I patted Hugo on the shoulder. That's all in the past. He placed 2 tubes of suppressants on the table and pulled up my sleeve, revealing the jagged scar. No, it's not. I know you hate us, Hugo said, brushing the scar lightly with his fingertips. It was the one I got when I was hit with a beer bottle at the bar. He looked at me with those same innocent, stubborn eyes. But you can't hate me. That's not fair. Hugo was the only one who ever truly loved me. It was that love that made everything feel a little more bearable. All I ever really wanted was a home of my own. That's all. The places he touched began to burn. It was that familiar, overwhelming heat. My vision started to blur. Hugo caught me as my body began to slide down. Your heat has started. I reached for the suppressants on the table. But another hand shot out and knocked both tubes to the floor. The sound of shattering glass echoed faintly. Hugo's voice followed, light as air, completely unapologetic. Sorry. I accidentally broke the suppressants. 3. A gentle touch brushed the sensitive back of my neck, warm breath whispering by my ear. I shivered for a moment but was gently forced to lift my head by the hand at my neck. Bro. Even now, Hugo's tone was soft and coaxing, trying to act cute. My voice trembled despite myself. Hugo, I still carry your family name. He chuckled softly, his arm wrapped around my waist, turning me toward the table and lifting me slightly. Forgot. We're not actually related by blood. Hugo is my younger brother, and I thought I knew him well. But after 6 years apart, so much must have changed, I barely recognized him anymore. No matter the situation, he could always say whatever benefited him most without flinching. The kid who used to cry in my arms about our strict father had somehow learned these tactics all on his own. Hugo, I called his name with a mix of feelings I couldn't even sort out myself. You're doing this on purpose. The uncontrollable sensation in my body grew stronger. I was losing even the strength to stand on my own. The only support was his arm wrapped tightly around my waist. Bruno, I can help you. For the first time, he called me by my full name, his childish innocence gone, replaced with determination. In the time apart, he had grown into a mature man. The childish tricks I once used on him no longer worked. His lips were cool and soft as they lightly brushed my forehead. My skin pressed against the cold table without resistance. I instinctively tried to pull away, but the person in front of me held my leg lightly and pulled me into his embrace. His hug was warmer than any vague memory I had. But I quickly realized something was wrong. A familiar, deep ache started tugging at my nerves, spreading like a tide beneath the calming scent of the ocean pheromones he emitted. The sharp pain made my vision blur. After a few seconds, sweat beaded on my nose. Seeing my expression, Hugo stopped and softly asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." I didn't want him to see my weakness, so I wrapped my arm around his waist and buried my face in his chest, gathering what strength I had left. A sharp sting seemed to reach my brain, but I bit my lip and stayed silent, waiting for the pain to pass. Hugo didn't press further. I wasn't sure if he, as a doctor, could tell what was wrong, but he kept up his stubborn efforts to help in his own awkward way. After a moment's silence, Hugo's fingertips gently stroked my sweaty cheek. His fingers weren't soft or gentle. Instead of comforting, it felt more like a warning to pay attention. "Bro, do I look foolish?" I was caught off guard, not reacting immediately, as he lifted my chin to meet his gaze. His eyes still held a cold, superior look, as if seeing me as his possession. "Don't think about anything else. I'll help you." His sharp teeth grazed the skin at the back of my neck, while his warm palm rested on my back. Amidst the heavy ocean pheromones, even the slightest shift in Hugo's emotions was clear to me. The pain of years apart, the effort to suppress feelings, the joy of reunion, and the fear of losing each other again, all vibrated through the air and into my senses. For a moment, my senses overloaded, and I couldn't imagine how Hugo endured such intense emotions. He looked so calm, almost indifferent. And strangely, in his arms, I felt safe. I instinctively released more pheromones to soothe his turbulent feelings. "Bro," the skin on my neck was still teased by his teeth. "Smells so sweet, like peaches." His bite on my cheek made me feel like a ripe fruit dripping with juice. He grabbed my leg and lifted me a bit higher. "You're really in heat now, good boy. Good boy." Hearing that name, an even deeper heat rose inside me. I felt like I might dry out completely in this warmth. "Don't call me that." Hugo raised his eyebrow but obediently stopped. The scent of peach and the cold sea pheromones mingled in the room. Once again, I was lying on the same bed as my brother. 4. After everything was over, I dragged my aching body to check on Grace and found she was already asleep. The temporary marking left me drenched in Hugo's pheromones, as if I'd been soaked in them. Luckily, Grace hadn't started her own cycle yet, so she couldn't smell any of it. But for the adults in the hospital who had already gone through their cycles, what had happened between Hugo and me was obvious without saying a word. The nurse changing Grace's dressing couldn't hold back her gossip. When I went to get some hot water, I overheard a group of nurses chatting, mostly about me, an Omega who was divorced and raising a child alone, yet somehow had already managed to get close to Hugo. I'd grown immune to their words. Worse things were said to me when I was pregnant. Because the other father had never appeared, I became their target, labeled a gold-digging homewrecker trying to cling to a wealthy family through the child. Back then, due to lacking pheromone supplementation from a partner, I even developed pheromone imbalance syndrome. Loss of appetite, acid reflux, swollen calves, and nighttime cramps were regular occurrences. In the lonely, sleepless nights, I wondered if it was worth it. If I terminated the pregnancy, I could still go home and be the brother Hugo got along with peacefully. But during bright daylight, my mind would fill with tenderness and hope for the baby inside me, my child, my blood, my family, my home. This wasn't my home, and I would never, ever go back there. After Grace was born, my pheromone imbalance didn't improve, irregular cycles followed, sometimes lasting 2 or 3 days, sometimes half a month. The inhibitors lost their effectiveness after long use. Hugo's arrival changed everything. I cared for Grace by day and relied on Hugo's temporary marking to get through the brutal cycles at night. He was sharper than I thought. Pheromone imbalance syndrome. He slammed the case file on the table in front of me. No wonder your cycles have been so abnormal. It's common during pregnancy, caused by a lack of pheromone intake from a partner. Hugo pressed on my shoulder. Bro, tell me, what really happened? Seeing the anger on Hugo's face made me want to laugh for a moment. How ironic, wasn't it? His eyes silently and stubbornly fixed on me as countless long explanations ran through my mind, true or false. But when it came time to speak, I felt too tired and just shook my head, whispering 4 words, I don't want to say. I had promised my mother I'd keep this secret forever as my last repayment to her. That night, the hospital lights cast cold, rigid shadows on everyone's faces. I begged my mother to let me keep the baby and promised I would take this secret and run far away, never to return to their family. For the first time, I realized how cruel she could be. For her own future, she forced her own child onto an abortion table at a small clinic. All my dreams of family shattered the moment I knelt before her. I no longer begged for her love. Under the harsh surgical lights and cold instruments, I couldn't see her face clearly through my tears, only felt a brief softening in her attitude. But it wasn't pity for me, it was a final transaction. If you don't abort the child, fine. But you must take the baby and leave forever. Never come back. My first 23 years flashed by, and the moment she hesitated was the moment she loved me most. I was no longer just someone else's child, I had a child of my own. Hugo, frustrated by the lack of answers, released his grip on my shoulder and looked down at me, pressing harder with his words. Grace told me she only has one dad. Hearing Grace's name from Hugo made my heart race, suddenly realizing so much was out of my control. What else did Grace tell you? You're not married, right? Hugo's dark eyes locked on mine. You lied to me. I don't know what you mean. I avoided his gaze, stood up, and tried to escape the suffocating room, but Hugo grabbed my wrist and pulled me back. The pheromones he released overwhelmed my limbs, stopping me from moving further. It doesn't matter whose child it is, I can be his stepfather. A warm body pressed against my back. I didn't know how to describe my feelings, half pleased by Hugo's unconditional acceptance, half bitter over Grace's uncertain status. My heart was caught between 2 extremes, both tearing me apart. I sighed and finally understood that when someone has too much to say, sometimes they can't say a single word. The more you try to explain, the fewer words you manage to speak. Forget it. I wanted to tell Hugo there was no need to be so humble, but instead, I simply sighed and said those 3 words. Hugo tightened his grip on my hand, unwilling to let go. I don't care who you married, but why wasn't that person by your side? After a 2-second pause, he slowly asked, Bro, how did Grace really come into this world? He asked as if he already had his answer. My heart pounded wildly, afraid that the 6-year-old's secret would finally be revealed. But along with the fear came a secret hope I couldn't explain. Hugo's voice was soft, almost fading into the air, but he was close enough for me to hear clearly. Were you forced? I remembered that night, the clueless, sensitive boy clutching my arm and calling out in heat. The full moon's light fell at the foot of the bed. Maybe then I could have stopped it from happening. It was something done out of necessity, not force. I softened my tone without meaning to. Hugo, I was willing. I was even grateful Grace came into my life, giving me an anchor in this world instead of wandering alone like a lost soul. But he was irresponsible. You got so sick because of it. Hugo's voice grew low and sad, like a hurt puppy. It's not that serious, really. I reached out and patted the head tucked into my neck, trying to comfort him. His words were earnest and pitiful, but his actions were stubborn and unyielding. Bruno, if you don't tell me, I'll find out someday. My hand froze on his head. I wanted to argue but didn't know where to start. The person behind me continued seriously, and I'll make sure you get better. 5. Hugo said it, and he did it. The fierce heat of my cycle was eased under his temporary marking. Bite marks layered my neck, and to keep Grace from noticing, I wore turtlenecks for a whole month. Grace thought I just had a cold or fever and kept asking if I still felt unwell. Hugo stood nearby and quickly reassured her, "Dad is fine now, Grace, don't worry." My hand trembled slightly as I helped Grace with her blocks. A piece slipped through my fingers, and Hugo caught it, placing it back correctly. "Why are your hands shaking, brother?" Hugo whispered so only I could hear. Last night's conversation flashed in my mind. Grace will see. I pushed away the head biting my neck and chuckled softly near his ear, "I'm treating you." My ears burned hotter, and a wave of heat spread through me, making even my fingertips go weak. Hugo, reckless as ever, pressed his hand on my lower back, absent-mindedly kneading while talking to Grace. Grace pouted, "Uncle, I want to do it myself." "All right," Hugo apologized kindly to Grace, loosening his grip on me and bending down to her level. "Uncle was wrong. How about I buy you a new set of toys to make up for it? What do you like, Grace?" I reached up and rubbed my sore neck, irritated by the constant friction. "Is Hugo a dog?" His bite was ruthless. Pheromone imbalance syndrome is caused by not getting enough pheromones and relying too much on inhibitors. That's what Hugo told me so righteously, always armed with his own explanations. Maybe it was just my imagination, but the frequent swelling and pain in my glands did ease under Hugo's pheromone therapy, yet the marks he left began to ache again. That afternoon, Hugo got a call from home, asking when he'd be back. He openly held the phone, still clutching my waist and biting my glands. But he didn't break the skin, more like a dog gnawing on a small piece of flesh. I couldn't tell if he was helping treat my pheromone imbalance or just continuing his oral fixation phase. I heard the voice on the phone and tried to step away, but he pressed on my abdomen and pulled me back into his arms. Casually, Hugo rubbed my earlobe and said to the caller, "I'll come home this weekend." "I heard from Curtis you saw Bruno at the hospital." A familiar voice came from the phone, freezing me. Hugo seemed to notice, his palm stroking my back as he lowered the phone and glanced at me. I forced a smile, though unseen, I knew it was stiff, and Hugo kissed the corner of my mouth in reassurance. Then he told the caller, "Yes, I'll bring him home this weekend." I shook my head hard. Only after Hugo hung up did I dare to say, "I'm not going back." "What are you afraid of?" Hugo studied my face closely, making me feel exposed, like I was stripped bare under the sun. "I don't want to go back," I repeated, trying to stand and free myself, but the pheromone pressure forced me to stay put. "You always say that." Since our reunion, every confrontation with Hugo ended with me losing, both in words and pheromone suppression. Though he never used it to coerce, it still annoyed me. "Sweetheart." He called me again. "Everyone at home knows. Why keep hiding?" "I want to stay with Grace. She can't be alone in the hospital." I forced myself to give a reasonable excuse. But no, I was lying. I was scared. Even I couldn't say exactly what I feared. Hugo gently touched my hair and calmly said, "Grace will come with us." "Why?" I shot up, looking him straight in the eyes. "I don't agree. Grace must never go home." Hugo showed no surprise or annoyance at my reaction, only a hint of satisfaction as if it went according to plan. "If you tell me now why you left, you won't have to go." I stood up, unable to hide the mocking smile on my lips. "Hugo, I don't need your permission to do anything. Bro, just listen." Hugo's hand covered my wrist. "You still have a choice." I shook off his grasp decisively, but on family gathering day, I finally understood what Hugo meant. Grace laughed happily in Hugo's arms and asked me, "Dad, Uncle said he'll take me to see Grandpa and Grandma. Is it true?" How was I supposed to tell Grace that her grandparents didn't look forward to her coming? That I had given birth to her all by myself? I simply had no courage, no way to say it. Hugo knew this well. I didn't know what expression to make or what to say to Grace. Thankfully, Hugo answered her, "Yes, Dad is taking you for a surprise. Are you happy?" "Happy?" Grace clapped on Hugo's shoulder. I forced a smile and nodded. My gaze passed over the cheerful Grace and landed on Hugo's cold face. He showed no remorse, acting as if everything was perfectly natural. Noticing my look, he tilted his head and curled his lips slightly. "Bro, let's go." 6. After driving for a while, Grace's initial excitement gradually faded, replaced by anxiety about the upcoming meeting. "Will Grandpa and Grandma like Grace?" she asked. "Why do you ask that?" I pulled her into my arms, feeling sorry that someone so young would worry like this. Grace tilted her head on my shoulder, fiddling with the ties on her dress. "Then why have they never met Grace before?" "Everyone will like Grace, she's so adorable," Hugo, sitting behind the wheel, said soothingly. Grace nodded softly in reply, though whether she believed Hugo or not, the ride became much quieter. We arrived at a familiar place, my old home. My mother sat on the sofa, leisurely drinking tea, her skin glowing with the care of years. Hearing the door open, she turned with a bright expression. I knew it was practiced warmth, the mask she always wore. "Hugo's back. Auntie made your favorite fish." Her warm words stopped abruptly when she saw Grace in Hugo's arms and me following behind. Her smile froze like a mask glued to her face. She probably never expected me to come back. At the first sight of me, she forgot to hide her reaction. After 2 or 3 seconds, she forced a stiff smile and said, "Bruno? Bruno? Does Mom even remember what Bruno liked to eat?" "So all these years I was gone, you really, truly, lived happily without a trace of missing me or guilt. But I am your child, born from your body, carrying your bloodline, your flesh and blood. Isn't that true?" Looking at her startled face, I strangely felt a sense of relief. The love I had longed for over 23 years returned in a twisted, painful form. I looked at her face and genuinely smiled. "Mom." She still stood stiffly, staring at me, speechless. I squeezed Grace's hand. "Grace, say, Grandma." "Grandma," the little girl mumbled timidly from Hugo's shoulder. I turned to her. "Mom, this is my child." Mom's face went pale, as if she aged several years in an instant. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "It's good you're back. What's the child's name? Is it really good that I'm back?" "Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost, Mom?" I gave up childish defiance and wiped the mechanical smile off my face, answering flatly, "Grace." My stepfather showed no surprise at my presence and didn't really care. After all, I'm not his biological child. He went through the usual motions, asking Hugo and Curtis about work, then suddenly remembered to ask about Grace's age and school. I knew he wasn't truly interested and gave brief answers. Hugo's been so busy with work. It's rare he comes home. "Stay here, we'll get a room ready," Mom said to Hugo while glancing at my stepfather. I sat holding Grace, a silent witness to this cold family drama. "Bruno and," Mom hesitated. "Grace," I interrupted sharply, covering Grace's ears. Mom nodded. "Bruno and Grace will stay, too. Have Xiao Fong prepare a guest room." "Where's your old room, bro?" Hugo asked, clearly already knowing the answer. Curtis's face darkened but he held back. Mom diffused the tension. "It's full of clutter. Clearing it out will take time." I wasn't picky and said casually, "The guest room will do." That evening, Hugo brought Grace milk and stayed until she finished it. It started raining at night. I was awakened by dryness in my throat and went to the kitchen for water. The room was pitch black except for a sliver of moonlight spilling onto the table. Years ago, Hugo and I had sneaked to the fridge in the dark night wearing pajamas to steal ice cream. Back then, we had each other. I looked at his clear profile under the fridge light, feeling it was the happiest moment of my life. Lost in thought, I bumped my shin on the table's corner. The sharp pain made me curl up. Afraid to wake anyone, I clenched my teeth and swallowed the scream. At 2 a.m., I wasn't the only one awake. Curtis, dressed in his day clothes, leaned outside on the balcony, smoking. Hearing the noise, he shone his phone's flashlight into the living room, the cold, harsh light piercing my eyes. I reflexively raised my arm to block it. "I really don't get how you can come back with a bastard in tow," he sneered. His face was lost in shadows, only the flickering red tip of his cigarette visible as his lips moved with mocking words. I'd heard that tone my whole life. Mom's indulgence let him treat every bit of me like a trophy, and every irritation he caused as a medal, ruined homework, soiled clothes, broken collectibles blamed on me. I have to admit, he's uniquely talented at being an asshole. "Curtis, you can keep your mouth shut if you can't be nice." I stood and grabbed his cigarette, pressing the burning tip near his eye, close enough to singe the whole eyeball. But then the sharp scent of rum mixed with the rain outside weighed heavily on my shoulders. The pungent alcohol overwhelmed the room. An alpha's pheromones. I hated my body for trembling uncontrollably under his dominance. "Do you know why I despise you?" Curtis chuckled scornfully. I clenched the table corner to keep balance, my palm aching, my bruised shin hurting too. I sneered back. "Because all you have to support your fragile confidence is this." Using my last strength, I pressed the cigarette to his ear, the burning skin crackling, then flicked it away with a punch. In the dark, he spat curses and grabbed my hair, yanking me up. The pain in my scalp and pheromone suppression made resisting futile. The unburnt cigarette reeked, mixing with strong rum, dizzying the room. "Brother, why do you insist on coming back when you have a good life outside?" Though we are half-brothers sharing the same mother and blood, his voice and scent made me feel visceral rejection. Curtis rarely called me brother, and hearing it from his mouth felt disgusting. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room. I saw the disgust and twisted desire on Curtis's face and thought first of all, Grace was still in the room. If she woke up and didn't see me, she'd be scared. I have to go back. I will go back. 7. What are you two doing? My mother's voice thundered through the storm. Curtis and I both turned our eyes toward the stairs. On that night filled with thunder and rain, my mother seemed like a ghost long lurking in a painting. "Had enough noise? Still want to wake your father?" Dressed in a nightgown, she held herself with an air of elegance, chin raised, eyes lowered as she looked at us. She saw me kneeling at Curtis's feet, hair pulled, looking utterly humiliated. Curtis finally snapped out of it, slowly reining in his pheromones, but the scent lingering in the living room was so strong it could make a non-drinker dizzy. "You ruined one child and still want to ruin a second." My mother approached with a cold glance slanting at me. "Yes, does your son know that the bastard he talks about carries true, legitimate blood?" I relaxed all my strength, leaning back on the sofa with a smile nearly breaking into tears. Curtis didn't understand our conversation and just stared at my mother's face, wearing that foolish expression again. "Don't you know yet?" I was too tired to handle the pointless lies anymore. "Hugo and I." Smack. A buzzing slammed into my ear. The sharp pain in my cheek was followed by burning heat. I forced a smile. "Mom, aren't you happy?" "What do you mean?" Curtis froze, then after a few seconds spoke again, his voice trembling. "You mean, that bastard is your child with Hugo?" I curled up in the sofa corner, letting out a low laugh. So even something as intangible as that can become a weapon of retaliation. This world is absurd to the point of ridiculousness. Bro. 8. My shoulders stiffened. Looking up, Hugo stood in the doorway wearing a black turtleneck sweater, hand on the doorknob. He seemed completely unsurprised by what had happened. "Is what you just said true?" Hugo walked over step by step. I shrank back, trying to hide, but he grabbed my arm and pressed me down on the sofa. His embrace was warm. He had grown fast, half a head taller than when I left, and with one arm could wrap me completely into his hold. The smell of rum is awful, Hugo wrinkled his nose, ignoring Curtis's dark face and my mother's pale lips beside him. He sat on the sofa, clearly unfazed, even in control. His gentle touch rested on my gland, where suppressed pheromones slowly diffused into the air under his calming presence. A strong palm covered my trembling waist. Hugo looked up and met the eyes of the other two. So Auntie has known all along, even before I, the father, found out. His tone was calm, but the pheromones in the air projected pressure, squeezing the very breath out of the room. Hugo, I clenched his sweater at his shoulder, trying to steady my ragged breathing. Grace. Don't worry, she's still asleep. He kissed my hair softly, stroking my head in front of the stunned looks from Curtis and Mom. I knew he did it on purpose. Unable to control my body under the conflicting pheromones, I pressed my forehead to his shoulder, and my words came out not as gentle whispers but sharp. What did you put in the milk? Something to help Grace sleep better. I'm a doctor, don't worry, it won't harm her. He casually rubbed the back of my neck. Curtis's face darkened even more, holding the table to keep himself upright under the overwhelming alpha pressure. Bruno was my brother before you were born. Hugo's palm pressed firmly on my burning cheek, his cool hand soothing the swelling. He tilted his head slightly. I don't care whose child he is or whose brother he is, but he is mine, my brother, my wife, who bore my child. Auntie, you're being a bit presumptuous, Hugo scoffed lightly at the two standing nearby. I had no energy left for anyone else, just gripped Hugo's shirt tighter. Grace and I are going home. Hugo's hand at my lower back paused. All right. His gentle voice came with a thumb brushing behind my ear. Where you go, I go. 9. By now, I couldn't tell if this was all a show Hugo was orchestrating and I was the fool. He had known everything all along. I don't know when the truth was revealed. Searching my memory, every scene had no clear clue. In the car, I finally asked the question. When did you find out? I kept a blood sample from Grace's test, Hugo said, turning to look at me like a dark, eerie ghost. Bro, why didn't you tell me? I thought that night was just a dream, I said as he leaned close, lips brushing my hot cheek. I quickly moved away. So you brought me home on purpose, just to force me to tell the truth? I never imagined this person before me would put me in such an embarrassing position. Hugo, you're too much. You ran away without telling me, kept it secret until today. Couldn't I do this? Hugo laughed coldly. Tell me, if I hadn't done this, would you have kept this secret until death, hiding from me? He was right. I probably would have. The air fell silent. Silence itself was an answer. A hot tear dropped on my collarbone. I froze, almost thinking it was a hallucination. Hugo still stayed close, head lowered, his hair hiding his expression. Bruno, I love you. He finally looked up at me. No tears, just eyes like black holes swallowing all light, pheromones swelling with his emotions. I felt his unstable feelings, as if they might tear him apart. Don't leave me. He didn't say it pleadingly, every word was a command. Though afraid, his tone was threatening. He pulled a bottle of medicine from the car's storage and patiently explained its effects. But an overdose can cause shock, even death. At that moment, I wished I didn't know Hugo so well, wished all my assumptions were just one-sided hopes, that I had guessed wrong. What do you mean? My voice trembled without control. Don't leave me. He repeated the words calmly, holding his posture and expression steady. His reaction scared me. I grabbed his wrist holding the bottle. I won't. I won't. I repeated without thinking. So many questions crowded my mind, but disorganized, I could only repeat those 4 words over and over, clutching his wrist tighter. Hugo nodded, then leaned in to nip my lip like a dog. The air in my mouth was sucked dry. When he let go, my tongue tingled. Hugo would die if he left me. This wasn't an exaggeration. Now I truly understood. 10. The next day, Grace woke up feeling strange and asked why we had come back. Hugo had already prepared an answer. You had a slight fever while you were asleep yesterday, so Daddy was worried and took you back to the hospital overnight. See, Daddy is tired. Daddy, Grace whispered softly and climbed into my arms. I don't know when I'll be accepted. Hugo was playing the pity card again. Grace didn't understand what he meant, but seeing him sad, she went over to comfort him. Little uncle, don't be sad. I watched Grace wipe away the non-existent tears from Hugo's arms with her little hands. The sunlight was bright that day when, on a whim, I said, Grace, he is your dad. But, Grace's little brain couldn't process such an overload of information. Little uncle is Daddy's brother. Not his biological brother. I blurted out too quickly and had to explain it that way. Hugo was stunned for 2 seconds, then gently explained the situation to the little girl in his arms. I have 2 dads. Grace was fond of Hugo, so she was happy to hear the news. But this also caused a problem. When Grace called Daddy, we couldn't tell which one she meant. Hugo, with mischief brewing, told Grace at some point to call me Mom. Grace had never called me Mom since birth, so I felt a bit embarrassed. But I couldn't refuse Grace just over a name, so I agreed every time, and she gradually got used to it. As her condition improved, she was ready to be discharged. Under Hugo's urging, Grace and I moved into the new apartment he rented. There are only 2 bedrooms, you and I share one, Grace gets the other. Grace has never slept alone. Grace is a girl. You can't always stay with her. She's 5 now, she should learn to sleep alone. Hugo argued with conviction. He was right. Grace was a little girl, still young and unaware of gender, but I couldn't pretend not to see that. Grace cried for a long time because of this, and I almost softened. But Hugo was patient, quietly explaining to the little girl that he would read her stories at night, and if she was brave, she would have a friend to keep her company while sleeping. That friend was a doll, and Grace nodded slowly, her tear-wet lashes crooked against her eyelids, reluctantly agreeing. One ordinary afternoon, Hugo knelt on the floor and presented a ring to me, saying, "Let's get married." I had long known marriage couldn't bind 2 people, it could even create more friction. Strong blood ties didn't guarantee affection, much less a thin sheet of paper as proof. But when Hugo said those words, I was still very happy. I finally had the happy family I had dreamed of and longed for. I had searched for it painfully, crossing mountains and rivers, going down countless wrong paths, but in the end, I still returned to Hugo. We never went back home after that. I didn't know if such an unconventional relationship could be accepted by others, but thanks to Hugo, I never heard any nasty words. Mother and stepfather divorced. I knew Hugo had a hand in it because he had said many times he wanted us to appear together on one household registration, not as siblings, but as husband and wife. In early spring, I started feeling sleepy and nauseous. Hugo, worried, took me for a checkup. I had been through this before and had an idea of the results. Hugo was excited when he found out, resting his head on my belly, talking to the barely developed embryo as if it could hear him. What a child, he didn't even realize who the doctor was. He was busy at work and couldn't take Grace to and from school, so he hired a nanny. In late pregnancy, my calves swelled and cramped frequently. I felt like I was back to when I was carrying Grace. Hugo prepared my daily meal plan carefully: avoid cold fruits, eat less of blood-activating foods, ensure all trace elements were included, and bought many calcium tablets, reminding me when to take them. Every day Hugo massaged my calves, warming ointment in his palms before applying it while asking, "Was it this hard when you were pregnant with Grace?" I shook my head, but it made me remember more and more how difficult it was to carry Grace alone. Even going to the bathroom was a struggle. I often cried at night without knowing why, thinking too much, then forgetting all worries clearly during the day. I just felt very happy and wanted to cry, but that happiness was mixed with inexplicable grievances. I never really understood my own feelings. Hugo said I showed signs of depression and asked what I had been thinking about lately. I didn't have to lie to Hugo, so I told him I was just thinking about when I was pregnant with Grace. Bro, he looked at me with tender eyes. I didn't know what he was thinking, But I wasn't really that miserable. I wanted to tell him. I should have been by your side then. Tears suddenly fell straight down. Hugo leaned over and kissed the tears on my cheek. You really suffered. I finally realized it wasn't the current me who was sad, it was the me carrying Grace. Sometimes I even found my own emotions puzzling, but Hugo accepted them well. He wasn't talkative, yet during my silence, he tried his best to share everything happening around us. As the due date approached, my fingers swelled so much that even my wedding ring wouldn't fit, and I didn't want anyone to see me like this, so I also became cold toward Hugo. Hugo noticed my mood, which surprised me. He said, "Bro, you've always been beautiful." He said, "I knew early on that I'd be tangled up with you my whole life." At that time, we were young, tangled and separated for more than 10 years, and yet, after all the twists and turns, we ended up by each other's side. Once again, I wanted to believe I would be loved and hoped for countless tomorrows together with the one beside me.